chapter 12 is communication rules of engagement. So it's very again, chapter 11, I refer to it as nuts and boltsy, and that this one is as well. And it's just some pretty simple rules that I think if we think about them and we consider them as we interact, I think our communications can be better. I mentioned this last week. Rule number 1 is clarify, verify, and then clarify again. And this is there's a magical phrase which is, hey, let me see if I understand what you're saying here. And then you repeat back, right? And then that to me is just a simple, fundamental little rule that takes a pause and allows you to make sure that that you're understanding. Another rule is just be very careful in terms of rule number 2 is active listening can be a distraction, and it's one of these sort of almost like passively aggressive things that we need to be aware of how we're listening in terms of how that's impacting the presenter and also the other people engaged. And so, it's you want to leave room for the presenter too. So let me get this in my brain straight. Okay, so like when you're listening, oftentimes somebody has more to say. But what happens is they get done talking and then we immediately engage, and then that steers the conversation where we want the conversation to go. And so one really healthy practice is to leave like an obnoxiously long period of time, like 5 seconds, which doesn't sound like very much, but 5 seconds is like forever in our world, And so leave that 5 seconds. And then at the end of 5 seconds, you're pretty clear that the person is done. And you can even check in at that point. Were you able to get everything across? Interrupting, like, just don't do it. It is a form of dominance, right? And we just have to be very, very careful in terms of interrupting. And it happens way more often than we think. And by the way, men are 40% more likely to interrupt than women. And so this is, hey, men, don't interrupt. And women pay attention. But also, I think that when someone is interrupting, I think we need to call them to account, because interrupting is an unhealthy. If there's interrupting happening on a team, it's probably a pretty clear sign that there's some dysfunction in that team, because you really shouldn't interrupt, right? And then don't disguise statements as questions. Leaders do this all the time, right? You want to steer the conversation. And so, you say, well, have we ever thought about, the question is, or, and so like when leaders ask questions, oftentimes they're statements, and it would just be much simpler and clearer if you just made a statement, right? Because then everybody would know it's a statement, and there's nothing unclear about that. Value candor, right, and sincere expression. So candor is like the magic sauce in communication. Is it Kim Scott, Radical Candor? This book is like so beautiful and amazing. And it's radical candor is oftentimes more difficult, but like 20 times more effective than she goes into this whole thing about ruinous empathy, which is, we all end up in these spots where it's just easier to say than not candid thing, just to move the thing along. And that isn't an effective or healthy form of communication. There's also, and this is this ratio between critique and compliments, and I've always just thought that's complete bunk, right? And that we should compliment when we feel like complimenting, and we should critique when we feel like critiquing. And you know what? If the ratios get a little sideways once in a while, then that's probably cause for a conversation. I think clearly stating your intention, that's rule number 7. Clearly stating your intention going into any conversation is super important, right? Like, this is what I intend to get out of this conversation, or this is what I intend to communicate, or this is what I intend for you to leave with. Number 8, pay attention to nonverbal communication. Like, I get accused of this shit all the time, right? My nonverbal communication is like brutal, and I work on it, but it is something that I'm very, very poor at. My nonverbals are not solid. And then as a manager, number 9, as manager, speak last. As the leader, speak last. because when you speak, you absolutely steer the conversation wherever the conversation you want the conversation to go. Limit sarcasm and jokes. Oftentimes, jokes interrupt something really important that's happening, and people use jokes as a way to release pressure when that pressure is what's necessary in that moment in time to get to some some important engagement or communication. And I mean, humor is not a bad thing. I don't mean that, but you just have to be really careful with how you use it. And you see it all the time, like really high pressure moment, right? It's like, and then somebody makes a joke or somebody makes a sarcastic comment, and then you just spin right out of that important moment you were in. And then finally, use silence as a way to mine for gold. And that awkward silence is like the magic elixir, to get people to engage. And it is so uncomfortable. I had a kid in my class say to me the other day, he's talking constantly in class, and I asked him about it. He's like, dude, he called me dude, which I thought was fun. He's like, dude, I cannot handle silence. I just can't handle it. And so anyway, but that silence goes a long ways to bringing stuff out. And we need to leverage silence as a tool in communication, which I don't think is used frequently enough. So those are 11 rules of engagement on communication. I think they're fun, but I think there's a lot of them in here that are counterintuitive, and I hope this is helpful.